We begin, though, with the volunteers facing down Canada's wildfires. Good morning. I'm Matt Galloway, and this is The Current. We may have woken up this week to a hazy view or the scent of smoke. The wildfires that have been raging across this country are top of mind for the firefighters on the front lines, and many of them are volunteers. Some 70% of firefighters in this country are volunteers, and it's getting harder to recruit people for that job. Kevin Smith is a volunteer firefighter at the Moores Mills Fire Department in New Brunswick. Rob Evans is a volunteer firefighter in Redwood, Meadows, Alberta. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Kevin, tell us why you became a volunteer firefighter.
Well, I've been at it for a long while. I guess it more or less was you just kind of fall into those jobs in the community you're in. And, there was a need where I was working for a daytime driver and fireman because the gentlemen that, were in the community were elderly. They didn't like to drive the truck, so they brought a radio down to where I worked. And I run it through the day, and my boss would run it at night. So you just kind of fall into it as a community thing. So
you say a long while. You've been doing this since 1982. Is that right?
Thereabouts, yeah.
Yeah, and you helped create the fire department in your town?
Well, no, we worked hard to keep it going. Yeah. It was actually started by in 1967. I guess we were incorporated as a Moores Mills Fire Department. But there was a Gerald Gilman Memorial that we go by, which was a gentleman in the community who, for years before that, had built and run a couple of his own trucks just as a community service. So it's been around a long while, and we're very proud of that heritage and trying to keep it going.
What about for you, Rob? Why are you volunteering?
I am a lifelong family tradition. I had uncles. I grew up in Erin, Ontario, just north of you. Mm-hmm. And my uncles, my dad were all firefighters in town. And when I became... Actually, I was 21 when I started, so it took me a couple of years after I was able to join the department. But I actually have a media background and was out in this area taking pictures of a wildfire, and they kind of recruited me then. The rest, as they say, is history.
You didn't need to say yes, though. They recruited you. But, we'll talk about the dangers of this work. Why would you say yes to something like this? Why would you think that this would be something that you yourself should throw yourself into?
It is really in the blood. My dad used to say, and I kind of agree with Kevin, where you fall into it. But to more directly answer your question, my dad used to say, and I do believe him, that I do it because other people can't. The community has soccer coaches, we have hockey coaches, that type of thing. And what I'm able to do is provide a fire service. That's my interest, that's my knowledge, and that's how I serve the community.
Kevin, what sort of training do you get to become a volunteer firefighter?
Well, as it goes, when we first, now they have what they call a level 1, which is community college. New Brunswick puts it on. Well, that's who we go through to get the books. But it's quite a I guess it's a challenging thing, as Rob knows. There's when a new member comes to our fire department and say we want to join, well, the first thing they're faced with is, they have to be qualified before we can put them on the fire ground, and sometimes it could take as much as a year of training by the time they do their WMIS and their first aid and the practical as well as the theory through the books. It's quite a challenge, especially for a young family. The people that you get now are probably people that are coming back, settling in your area with a young family and a new career, And then, you go and you say, hey, why don't you join the fire department? It's very challenging for them with all that scenario.
And it's a volunteer position, but is there any sort of compensation or anything like that at all that would give you a bit of a break in doing this?
We do get there's a statement for our income tax that, if we put in so many hours, we get some deduction off of that, but it's not a great amount of money.
Yeah, you do it as a volunteer.
It's just a volunteer.
Yeah.
We sometimes the wildfires will pay manpower and crew, but I don't know there's anybody on our department in the last 40 years has taken any of it. We just put it back in. It's like Rob said, it's just something you do, for the good of the unit. People are every service club has members are loyal to the cause, and I guess that's what we do.
How often, Rob, do you get a call to go out to a fire or an emergency?
I think today is day 159 or 160 of the year, and just yesterday we did call number 178.
Wow.
So we're at about 1.1 calls per day.
And how does that work? You're not in a fire hall or something, so an app on the phone or something like that, or the phone just rings and away you go?
Yeah, Alberta has a provincial radio system, and all of our firefighters have a portable radio. So we can hear our tones going off from the dispatch center in Calgary, and we also have an app on our phone that is very popular across Canada. There's 3 or 4 different apps that departments use, but we're notified multiple different ways. One of the big issues in our area is the cell coverage, and I know governments for years have been promising improved networking or networks for cell service in rural Alberta or rural Canada,
right?
And that's a challenge for us.
And you're on call if in the few times perhaps that the phone isn't ringing, you're kind of on call. This could come at any time, day or night.
24/7, 365.
Uh-huh.
Our guys can turn the radio off if they're out enjoying a cold beer on a 30-degree day while they're cutting grass. I don't know who would cut grass when it's that warm, but if they're out in their yard or out with their family, at a local pub or something like that, then of course we have rules that you can't respond. So there's very little guys that actually, drink in our area, for example. It's volunteer to join and volunteer to, you don't have to respond. If you have, it's graduation time. So we've had a couple of firefighters that have kids that are graduating high school, and they chose not to respond that particular day. And we all knew it and knew why. And, we just move on. That's volunteer firefighting.
Kevin, in your small town, how many volunteer firefighters do you have?
Well, in our community, which is more of a community in the layout we have, but we have 19 active right now, but that's I suppose our average age. I was talking to the fire chief last night. I said, "What's our average age? Would it be 50?" He said, "Probably."
And so, is it easy to get new volunteers?
No, not so much. Like I said earlier, there's no great calling card other than the fact if we invite people to go to your fire halls, and see what's going on, and maybe it's something for you. Maybe I don't know. People just shy away. It's an interesting career. It's not maybe the safest or the most healthiest career, but it's just something that we do. But there's a lot of pluses to it too. You meet a lot of great people and make a lot of friends, and they got your back, and that's as important to me as any part of it.
Rob, what about for you? How has it been in terms of getting people to volunteer for this?
We're in a different situation. We're just outside of a city with 1.2 million people, so we have a lot of population in the area to draw from. And what we end up getting, we have 27 on our roster right now, and I would say about 12 or 13 of us are I want to say gung ho. That glorifies it, but we're there every day type of thing. The rest are guys that are using us as a resume builder. We use the analogy of a farm team. So they come and get training with us and get their experience, get our department name on their resume. And then 2 or 3 years later, they're on a paid department. And we've come to the realization that is the reality of it for us, where we're always going to have the numbers, but whether or not, a kid from Calgary that joins and, you talk about average ages. Our average age is under 30, right, I believe, right now. But you get a kid from Calgary joining us as a resume builder. He's not there within 3 or 4 minutes of that pager going off to respond. So that's where that, 13, 14 of us that are in the community, we get that first truck out.
Kevin, I'll let you both go, but just last word to you. When you see these fires happening across the country and the number of people, I mentioned the majority, a huge number of firefighters, some 70% of firefighters in this country are volunteers. What's going through your mind when you take a look at the wildfires?
Well, it seems to be the sign of the times, the way, things are changing with their climate. But I just think, how lucky we are to have the volunteers do what they're doing and, pray for their safety. And, I guess I'm glad I'm not there, but, like Rob would be, we would be if duty called, I guess. That's just the way it goes. You put things go aside when this is happening, you don't think about you think about the cause that you're going to. And reflect on that. I guess that's the way I always run.
Glad to hear about the work that both of you are doing, the volunteer work. It's important, and so thank you for telling us about it. Stay safe, and thanks for what you volunteered to do.
Thank you.
Right on. Thank you.
Kevin Smith is a volunteer firefighter in Oak Hill, New Brunswick. Rob Evans, a volunteer fire chief in Redwood, Meadows, Alberta. Ken McMullen is president of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs. Ken, good morning.
Well, good morning.
You have written that this country is hemorrhaging firefighters. What sort of decline has there been in the number of volunteer firefighters across this country?
Well, in 2016, there was 156,000 firefighters in this country. And in 2022, the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs conducted the same survey, and it showed that we're at 126,000. And obviously, that's a decline of 30,000. As you just talked to Rob and Kevin about, 90,000 of that 126 are volunteer. So it's closer to 80% of the Canadian Fire Service are volunteers. So we are definitely seeing a decline.
Why do you think it's so difficult to recruit people into this?
I had the pleasure of listening to a good friend of mine, Rob Evans, who I've known for over 20 years. Kevin, I haven't met in the past, but listening to those two gentlemen, you talk about just some of the challenges that it is facing our volunteer system. I think that there's opportunities to increase the recruitment and retention of volunteer firefighters. We've been working with government. You heard Kevin Smith talk about that small remuneration and that tax incentive. Currently, the volunteers in Canada get up to $3,000 in a tax incentive. And we've asked the Canadian government to increase that to $10,000, simply for the fact that $3,000 gets eaten and swallowed up really, really quickly. And that's aside from these major events that we're seeing in the country right now.
But is there something, we've talked on this program with firefighters and former firefighters about, for example, the links between cancers and the work that they're doing in terms of what they might be exposed to, and that this is something they're thinking about as paid firefighters. For volunteers, is that one of the things that would give people kind of a bit of a pause if they're thinking, you know what, I want to help my community, but there are real risks in terms of taking on this kind of work?
Yeah, I would suggest it's more than a bit of a pause. There's absolutely a correlation between the more we learn about the risks that are faced by our first responders, the more that we are going to see more questions, deliberate questions and intentional questions about what are we doing to ensure the safety of those men and women. And that goes for our career, our composite, and our volunteer. And I'll take that one step further because you absolutely are correct. We are seeing the increase of cancers related to the role of a first responder, particularly in this case, firefighters. Equally as important, we are seeing the mental health impacts of being a first responder. And a very unknown statistic, but one that's staggering, is less than 2% of the human population see, hear, and smell that of what a first responder does every time they go out on these calls. So you think about the risks that does mentally. We recognize that there is programs in place. However, at the end of the day, it's just not for everybody.
We've been talking, certainly in the last few weeks, as fires have been tearing through Alberta and parts of Nova Scotia and Quebec, Northern Ontario, about how fire is different now. And we were hearing about some of the training that those volunteer firefighters get. Is the training commensurate? Does it match with what those firefighters are up against now?
I think there's a couple of answers to that. Number one, there's training that is delivered across this country for all firefighters, and there are standards that we intend to meet the standards put out by national organizations. What's happening right now, using the wildfires as an example, wildfires are not our typical bread and butter type of event that our fire departments respond to on an average, on a regular basis. Although our information and data is showing that we have a significant increase in weather-related events, floods, fires, heat domes, etc. In 2013, up into 2013, the federal government had something called the Joint Emergency Preparedness Program, which was a dedicated budget line within the federal government that allowed fire departments to apply for training and equipment. And in 2013, that program ended. Indicated that it had met the mandate. And the reality was we need that money now more than ever. And so as we continue to advocate and work with government, we have made that point very clear that reinvestment in the Joint Emergency Preparedness Program is vital to these fire departments that need the additional training and the equipment needed for a whole host of exposures to events that we weren't typically training for 25 years ago. And I meant to mention that I too started as a volunteer some 26 years ago. And here I am today. And wow, things have changed since that time.
Just, I guess, finally, in the last minute or so that we have, if 70% of the firefighters in this country are volunteers, and we as a nation aren't ensuring that they are trained, that they have the equipment that's necessary, that the incentives aren't there to get them to volunteer in the first place, what's at stake, do you think?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. We have an obligation. We as a country and a society have an obligation to do what we can to show the value and the appreciation of the men and women that deliver this service every single day. And I'll say that on behalf of our volunteers, our composite, and our career departments. We recognize that it's going to take more than rain to put out these fires in 2023. We have to do a whole host of initiatives today to be better prepared for 24-25. Things like the tax incentive, reinvestment in the Joint Emergency Preparedness. We've also talked to the federal government about implementing a national fire advisor, a role within the federal government that would look at the coordination of equipment and resources across the country to assist with events like the ones we've been seeing across Canada right now.
This is important to talk about. And again, something that perhaps people aren't aware of in terms of the scale of that volunteer fire force. Ken, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time. Thank you to your listeners, and stay safe.
Ken McMullen is president of the Canadian Association of Fire Chiefs. We did contact the Ministry of Natural Resources. They sent a statement. It reads, in part, the Government of Canada has signed 9 agreements through the first phase of the Wildfire Training Fund, a $37.9 million fund designed to train and retain firefighters in communities that need that support the most. You'll hear more about this tomorrow on CBC Radio's The House. Catherine Cullen is going to speak with Bill Blair, Minister of Emergency Preparedness, about whether there is a need for a dedicated agency in Canada to deal with these sorts of emergencies, the wildfires that we are seeing right now, and the change in fires. You'll hear that tomorrow on The House. In the meantime, would love to hear from you. If you are a volunteer firefighter in this country, why do you do this, and what do you believe could be done to ensure that you are better supported and better protected in that work? You can email us, thecurrent@cbc.ca.